I inherited the land on a Tuesday. No ceremony. No lawyers sitting across a polished table. Just a thick envelope, a phone call, and a sentence that didn't fully register until days later. 3,000 acres. All deeded in your name. The property sat outside a growing development, rolling land, tree lines, a creek that cut through the middle like it had been there long before any zoning committee ever existed. My family had owned it for generations, long before the HOA signs went up, long before paved roads and manicured entrances tried to make the countryside look controlled. I didn't move out there right away. I didn't rush to build or fence or post signs. I visited quietly, walked the land, learned its shape again. Some places still remembered my grandfather's boots. Others were new to me. But all of it was mine, on paper, on record, legally unquestionable. Or so I thought. The first letter arrived less than a month later. It was polite, almost friendly. The HOA welcomed me to the community and informed me of certain expectations regarding land use, access roads, shared utilities, and compliance standards. It referenced bylaws I'd never seen, rules I'd never agreed to, authority I never granted. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. HOAs send letters. That's what they do. Sometimes they cast too wide a net. I figured a quick clarification would fix it. I ignored it. That was apparently the wrong move. The second letter was firmer, less welcoming. It mentioned ongoing noncompliance and community impact. It implied that parts of my land, were considered shared access zones. That's when I drove out to the gate. I stood there longer than I expected to, watching cars pass. Not on the public road, but on a gravel stretch that cut through my acreage. A road my family had built decades earlier for ranch use. A road that suddenly had HOA residents using it like a shortcut. I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. There were no signs claiming it was public. No easements posted. No documentation anywhere that suggested the HOA had rights to it. Yet there they were, driving through like they belonged. I reached out this time.
Calm. Direct.
I asked for clarification. Asked them to show me the documents that gave them authority over my land. The reply came quickly. Too quickly. They didn't send documents. They sent assumptions. They told me the land had always functioned as part of the community. That shared use was understood. That restricting access would be against neighborhood expectations. Not illegal. Not documented. Just expected. That's when the tone shifted. A board member, Karen, though not by name yet, requested a meeting. She phrased it as a courtesy, a chance to bring me up to speed. I went. The meeting wasn't about information. It was about control. They spoke as if the inheritance didn't matter, as if time erased ownership, as if enough people believing something made it true. Karen leaned back in her chair and smiled like someone explaining rules to a child. "You'll find," she said, "that resistance just makes things harder." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want cooperation. They wanted submission. And they were about to learn the difference between land they'd grown used to using and land they had zero legal right to touch. After the meeting, I stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. Not because they were rude. Not because Karen talked down to me. But because they never once asked a question. They told me how things were. They didn't care how things were documented. Within a week, I installed trail cameras along the road cutting through my ranch. Nothing fancy. Just enough to see who was coming and going. The footage filled up faster than I expected. SUVs. Pickup trucks. HOA service vehicles. Some slowed near the gate. Some didn't. One afternoon, I caught Karen herself driving through. No hesitation. No pause. She waved to someone behind her like this was her neighborhood shortcut. That was the moment shared use officially crossed into trespassing. I sent one email. Just one. It was short. Professional. Attached were copies of the deed, survey maps, and county records showing the road fully inside my property lines. I asked them, again, to provide any easement, agreement, or recorded right-of-way they believed existed. The reply didn't include documents. Instead, it included warnings. They told me that blocking access would disrupt emergency services, that limiting the road could endanger residents, that the HOA had historical precedent to continue usage. Historical precedent is a fancy way of saying we've been doing it so long we forgot to check if it was legal. Then came the fines. They fined me for failing to maintain a community access road. They fined me for obstructive intent. They even fined me for non-cooperation. All for a road they couldn't prove they owned. I didn't pay a single one. Instead, I filed a records request with the county. If an easement existed, it would be there. If the road had ever been dedicated to public or HOA use, it would show up. It didn't. What did show up was interesting. The HOA had applied years earlier for an access easement across my land. It had been denied. No appeal. No follow-up. Just denial. That explained everything. They weren't enforcing rights. They were trying to manufacture them. When I shared this with the board, the response changed again. Now, it wasn't warnings. It was pressure. They said residents were upset, that I was breaking tradition, that the community relied on that road during traffic, emergencies, and events. All problems created by planning a neighborhood around a road they never legally secured. I posted signage next. Private property. No trespassing. No HOA access. The signs were gone within days. Not damaged. Not vandalized. Removed. That's when I stopped emailing. Because when someone removes your signs, ignores your deeds, and fines you for land they don't own, the conversation is already over. The HOA thought this was still a discussion. They thought they could outlast me, pressure me, wear me down. What they didn't realize was that every step they took past my boundary only strengthened my position. And I was done letting them pretend my land was negotiable. The next violation happened in broad daylight. Not a resident. Not a contractor. A utility truck. HOA logo on the door. Flashing lights on top. They drove straight through the gate like it wasn't there and parked near the creek on my land. I watched it happen on my phone. That's when I realized this wasn't ignorance anymore. It was entitlement. I drove out there myself. The worker looked surprised to see me. Confused even. He said he'd been sent by the HOA to check a water line. I asked him whose land he thought he was on. He shrugged. Community property, I think. That phrase again. I showed him the deed. The map. The boundary stakes in the ground that had been there longer than the HOA itself. He apologized, packed up, and left without argument. Karen didn't. Within an hour, I had a voicemail accusing me of interfering with essential services. She warned me that blocking access could have consequences. Not legal consequences. Just consequences. That's when I made my decision. I hired a surveyor. Not to find the lines, I already knew them, but to mark them unmistakably. Bright stakes. Reflective markers. GPS-verified points every few hundred feet. Nothing aggressive. Nothing dramatic. Just undeniable. Then I met with a property attorney. I brought everything. Letters, fines, footage, records, the denied easement application. He barely needed half an hour. They have no rights here, he said. And they know it. That was the most important part. They knew. Which meant their next move wouldn't be a mistake. It would be a gamble. So I stopped reacting and started preparing. I ordered steel bollards. Not fences. Not chains. Bollards. Permanent, ground-set steel posts rated to stop vehicles. Placed strategically so the road could still function for me, but not as a throughway. I pulled the permits. I notified the county. I documented every step. Then I installed cameras that didn't blink or miss. The HOA noticed immediately. Karen sent an email marked urgent. She claimed the installation was illegal, that it would block emergency responders. Funny thing is, emergency responders had never requested access through my land. Not once. They had proper routes. This was about convenience, not safety. I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to. The day the bollards went in, I stood by the gate and watched as the first car approached. It slowed. Stopped. The drivers stared at the steel posts like they couldn't possibly be real. Then they turned around. The next car did the same. By sunset, the message was clear. The road was no longer understood. It was enforced. And that's when Karen made her biggest mistake. The first formal complaint came the next morning. Not from a resident. From the HOA's legal counsel. They claimed the bollards were obstructive, retaliatory, and contrary to community welfare. They demanded immediate removal and threatened escalation. I forwarded the email to my attorney and went back to my day. By noon, Karen had escalated it herself. She showed up at the gate. Not alone. 3 board members. 2 residents. Phones out. Voices already raised. Karen stood in front like this was a press conference, not a private property boundary. She demanded access. I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I didn't explain. I handed her copies.
Deed.
Survey. County permits. The denied easement application. She barely looked at them. Instead, she repeated herself louder. That's when I pointed to the steel. These, I said, are not a negotiation. Someone called the police. They arrived calm, professional, curious. Karen launched into her story. Community road. Emergency access. Long-standing use. She spoke fast, like speed could replace facts. The officer asked a simple question. Do you have documentation? She didn't. I did. The conversation ended quickly. The officer told her, politely but clearly, that the road was private property, the bollards were legally installed, and continued attempts to use the road could be considered trespassing. The word trespassing landed hard. Karen's tone changed instantly. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a line. Within days, residents started asking questions. Why had the HOA never secured access? Why were they fining someone for land they didn't own? Why had they ignored the county's denial? The board stopped sending emails. Then came the resignations. One member quietly stepped down. Another followed. The HOA's lawyer withdrew representation citing irreconcilable differences. And Karen? She sent one last message.
Short.
Defensive. Blaming miscommunication and legacy assumptions. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just retreat. The steel bollards didn't just stop cars. They stopped lies. They forced reality where entitlement had lived. And everyone finally saw what I had known from the beginning. The HOA wasn't losing access. They never had it. The ranch got quieter after that. Not just fewer cars. Fewer assumptions. The road stayed intact. Maintained. Used by me. The creek ran the same. The land didn't change. What changed was the way people treated it. The HOA stopped pretending. No more fines. No more letters. No more community expectations. The steel bollard stood where arguments used to happen. Residents found other routes. Emergency services confirmed they'd never relied on my road in the first place. And slowly, the story shifted from outrage to acceptance. People adapt quickly when reality doesn't bend. Karen never came back to the gate. I heard through others that she stepped down shortly after the board reshuffle. Too many questions. Too much documentation. Too many people realizing they'd been confidently wrong. What struck me most wasn't the victory. It was how quiet it was. No shouting. No lawsuits. No dramatic confrontation. Just facts and follow-through. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I was prepared. The land didn't need defending with anger. It needed clarity. Boundaries are strange like that. When they're invisible, people cross them without thinking. When they're clear, clearly marked, clearly enforced, most people stop. The HOA learned something important. Ownership doesn't expire. Convenience isn't a right. And we've always done it this way means nothing without proof. 3,000 acres doesn't make someone powerful. Understanding them does. The steel wasn't there to punish anyone. It was there to remind them. And it did its job perfectly.